So what are the differences in the nervous systems of people with ADHD? Well, there are structural differences, first off. So, speaking of the prefrontal cortex in ADHD develops more slowly, and really, it never fully comes online. On average, is delayed by about 30%. So, an 18-year-old is really functioning more at the level of a 12-year-old in terms of their response inhibition, verbal and nonverbal working memory, emotional regulation, and planning and problem solving, right? Okay, there are also chemical, aka neurotransmitter signaling differences. So this all comes down to dopamine and norepinephrine. These are the two big players when it comes to ADHD. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter that's involved in how we anticipate a reward. It's reward prediction. It's how we determine if something will be as good or better than what we expect, AKA, is it worth doing, right? Norepinephrine is the neurotransmitter that regulates our attention. Arousal, like how aroused are we? And that can be in terms of like awakeness and also arousal for another person. Um, it also helps us regulate alertness, memory, fight and flight. There are also networking differences. So I don't know if any of you have been following Dr. Richard Davidson's work. He's a researcher, neuroscientist here in Madison, but he has studied the Dalai Lama and some of the other Buddhist monks. They were doing happiness research, right? And they put them in scans, and that sort of was where functional MRIs and things like that started to detect that, when areas of the brain fire together, they wire together, right? And so that is where we have networks. And one of the theories involved in that is called the dual mode theory. And that is that there is a default mode network, which is also called system one, and then there's system two, which is also called the task functional network. So the default mode network, or system one, if you can see here, so it's a portion of the medial prefrontal cortex, and then the posterior cingulate, which is a part of the limbic system. It's this kind of like overarching thing that wraps all around the limbic system. So when the default mode network is activated, when those areas of the brain are wired and firing together, this is considered old brain, right? This is rapid processing, it's automatic. This is where emotions and cognitions come together. It's performing when we're stressed. It's just based on like what's happening right now in the environment. And system two would be considered new brain, right? This is slower processing, it's deliberate, it takes effort, it's logical, it's inhibited by stress, right? And this is we don't see much of the limbic system involved here with system two. This is mainly the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And I'm sure many of you have seen people talk about the brain like this, right? Where this is the prefrontal cortex and this is the limbic system. And when we're stressed, the prefrontal cortex goes offline because the limbic system takes over. We just need to be able to survive. And in ADHD, with default mode network never turning off, right? So automatic things, emotions, things like that are interjecting all the time. ADHDers are like this, right? Their default mode network is operating at the same time as system two. In a neurotypical brain, it's one or the other. When you are about to engage in a task, your emotions about doing the dishes can turn off, right? It doesn't really matter how you feel about doing the dishes. That's fairly irrelevant to the task. The dishes just need to be done. But that does not happen in ADHD. The default mode never turns off except when they're in hyperfocus. And it is also nicknamed the demon because it's emotional, and it is self-reflective, and often it's very negative and critical in nature. And when you are running your default mode network and your task functional network at the same time, that is like running the heat and the AC at the same time. That is not metabolically efficient. And so ADHDers are burning through glucose faster. Glucose is the fuel of the brain from the bloodstream, and they need more frequent inputs. And so this just speaks directly to the myth of, oh, stop giving kids too much sugar. It's sugar is what's causing them. That's why they're hyperactive. No, ADHDers actually need more sugar. We need more glucose. Okay, there are a lot more differences, right? So electrical conductivity differences. So if we put electrodes on everybody's heads right now and we were to measure what all your brain waves are, all of us really should be in beta, right? We should be our brains should be conducting electrical pulses at a rate at which allows us to be alert and be able to concentrate and think, right? We should all be in beta. And people with ADHD are, as they are navigating their day, trying to be in beta, either tipping up into gamma waves, which is literally when people are in fight or flight, right? Or they are dipping all the way down into theta waves, which is dream states. And so it's one or the other, and we don't know. I mean, it may be something that could eventually become sort of like a biomarker or a test that is done to diagnose ADHD. But right now it's just expensive and not really an efficient way. But we definitely see these differences in ADHDers. And also, just going back to that for 1 second, this is also where neurofeedback interventions for ADHD kind of arise. Okay, more differences in the ADHD nervous system. So synaptic pruning differences. So in typical development, humans go through a process of eliminating the neurons we don't, AKA, need. And those would typically be the excitatory ones. Excitatory meaning the projections that are coming out of the limbic system to the motor cortex and the frontal cortex, right? To make the brain more efficient, right? We are all born with about 100 billion neurons. And typical adults are maintaining about 80 billion of those, right? So all of these projections that are coming out that are notice, 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 react, 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 feel, feel, feel. A neurotypical person will start to prune some of those so that they are noticing less, reacting less, and feeling less, right? ADHDers prune fewer neurons. We maintain too many of the excitatory neurons, right? So there's increased connectivity coming from the limbic system to the motor cortex, which means act first, think later. Notice, react, feel. It is more difficult to filter out irrelevant information, right? Like it's harder for me to ignore the distraction of the temperature in my office, which is 80 degrees right now, and the fan that I have blowing on me, right? A neurotypical person may have a better ability to ignore that in order to perform whatever task they need to do right now. That also means that there are weaker connections from the prefrontal cortex back, right? So the think first and then act system, which really is the brakes. We have weaker brakes on notice, react, feel. There are also myelination differences. So a disruption in the myelination of axons, either in myelin wraps, right? So the insulation around the wiring in our brains and our nervous system, or axonal size. Like, if you think about, compare a $2 pair of earbuds. I think I have a set right here, right? This pair of earbuds, this wire is very thin and flimsy, and also the coating on here I could easily chip away. Um, there's not a ton of information that is going to be transmitted through these. Like the base, it's not going to be very good, right? And compare that to the headphones that like a radio jockey is wearing, and like the thickness of the cable, so much more um, fine and depth of information can be transmitted through wiring like that, that is very well insulated. The wire itself is thicker, right? Okay, so in ADHD, there's a difference in a disruption of how the neurons are, even, the size, their capacity, and their insulation. And so this causes a dysfunction in the transmission of signal in the white matter fibers, which provides an underlying mechanism related to the symptoms and cognitive deficits in ADHD. Okay, more differences in the nervous system, folks. Like, I'm really trying to get across here to everyone that what is happening in ADHD is absolutely biological and neurological. Okay. All right. So, the autonomic nervous system, there are differences there. People with ADHD have a functional deficiency of the vagus nerve. And what that translates into, because the vagus nerve that's parasympathetic, right? So that's rest and digest. That translates into heart rate variability, or HRV, which is kind of sort of a term that I think has become a little bit more trendy, and people are paying a lot more attention to HRV. But it is the beat to beat variation of heart rate. And it is the result of the interplay between the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest, right? So a higher heart rate variability reflects a good ability to adapt to environmental and physiological needs, right? Your heart rate can adjust quickly and adapt to whatever's happening in your environment, whether that's, emotionally or physically, all of that. And a lower heart rate variability is observed in ADHDers. And this means that ADHDers are less adaptable to environmental and physiological needs, even all the way down to their cardiovascular system.